But I want to give an introduction to sort of what you're looking at with Charlie's work. When you're in the studio making this kind of work, the conscious decisions, the conscious thoughts that you're often having, there are also some chairs up here, so there are 3 chairs here. It's called a hot seat. So. Just a little warning. Like the conversation that you're having in your own head that happens with words is like, where's the tape? Where's the extruder? How much paint do I have? And what it comes down to is all the back notions, all of the thinking, all the thoughts. That's all happening. Content, how the art works. This stuff is very subtle. It's very rich, and it builds up an artist over many, many years. And it's so complicated. There's no way any artist can realistically sort of explain everything that they're thinking or what goes into their work, because there's more than they can say. It has to do with things you've seen when you were a kid, the millions of images that you've seen over time, dreams that you had last night, books you read, things somebody said. There's another chair up here. We have room for more. So Charlie's work, in a lot of ways, the easiest way to start to understand what you're looking at is his work is about work. There's effort, there's skill, there's time. You can see what goes into it, and you can see how, like the final result, when you look at it, it feels satisfying, it looks appealing. You see the energy, you see, the actions, the movement of, the paint, a piece of paper. He makes all kinds of prints and cuts them and uses them. So there's all this work that goes on. It takes effort and time and skill, like I said. The ideas, the content behind it is a lot more complicated. And the good news is, he's not thinking about this consciously while he's working all the time. We don't have to do it either. To understand, to enjoy a piece of music by Bach, for example, you don't have to parse it. You don't have to balance out the counterpoint. You don't have to figure out what chords there are or what the progressions are. Is it plagal or blah blah blah? And that word, if you know it, you're a nerd. So you know what I mean. So right now when we're talking about it, it's a little bit different. But what I want to get to is to understand this painting, is to look at it and to enjoy it. If it's something that you like, if it feels right to you, you don't need to parse it. You don't need to shift into words. Like art historians, art critics, we want artists to think visually. I don't want to hear, explanations about every single thought, action, content that goes into it. And in general, when I read artist statements and the artists are acting like they own the content of their work, that what inspired them is literally the meaning of the work, then that's a problem. I don't trust it because it isn't how culture works. Polka dots mean one thing to somebody and another thing to somebody else. It could be paint, it could be a grid, it could be fabric, fiber. There's so many different things of what that means. And you can't control it. So taking a whole bunch of things that look like other things, and colors and the balances and composition, getting this to work together visually is complex of what's behind it. It can be easy because it's based on having it feel right, having it look right, having it seem right. And so when you're looking at it, that is enough to understand. So behind it, though, this is the part I want to get at. I'll talk a little bit about Cubism after. Cubism is very important, but it offered a possibility in art. And abstraction came out of it. I'll talk about that a little bit after. What I want to get at to start with Charlie's work, and I'm assuming because he's behind me, he's probably just shaking his head now pretty much the whole time. But there are different elements in this. And coming out of Cubism, late Cubism was all about sort of like the possibilities of representation. Collage was invented as part of late Cubism, talking about Picasso and Braque in 1912, 1913. So the idea of having textures and lines, different colors, all these different elements, these play in different modes of meaning. So they're different things like you have genres, like still life or a landscape or a portrait or whatever. The different modes of meaning, you can have a form, you can have drawing, you can have painting, you can have color, you can have background, you have an object in foreground, patterns, textures, all these different things. And what they play up to, they play your perception. And so it's about the experience of looking at a painting. So it comes down to that Charlie's done a lot of work, and he's playing to your perception, your experience, the time you spend, how you look at it, what you feel. And by making something that has so much work, time, effort, skill, and is so appealing, he's treating the viewer with respect. So he's acknowledging the viewer. And when we talk about art, sometimes the art's being made for like public consumption, sometimes it's being made for personal expression. And these things they're all in there. Surrealism, and it's sort of like focus on like allowing unconscious impulses to come through. Expressionism, having it sort of feel right with what you work out, but as well elements that make things look appealing, design, balance, formalism. These things are being presented for the public. And when you put all of this together, you're going to come up with something, if you do it very well, that the public is going to enjoy, and they're going to feel respected by that. And then the moment that we're getting to like the balance of the experience of the artist, the actions of the artist, and how these are going to be taken in by somebody else. We're talking about some pretty nerdy things like moral philosophy and stuff like that. But this is what culture is. These works would not have been possible 140 years ago in our culture before abstraction existed. So how we get from what we're looking at on the walls to what Charlie does to actually make these things happen, his processes about prints and images and his approach. There's a lot here. I think we should turn it over to him. No. Because I did kind of ramble.
No, you didn't. It opened, it cracked the ice. And you're making me, I painted these things. This is my second time to the exhibition, and I'm just figuring them out. I swear, that's just perfectly fine. So if you don't get them, don't worry about that. I'll try to help you a little bit on it, because I hate tyranny of any sort. I hate the tyranny of objectivity. I hate the tyranny of art history. I became an artist to free myself of all of those kinds of responsibilities, leaving me sometimes in the wilderness for decades, but that was my choice to go. I would like to help you with a couple points, because we're in Ellsworth. For something you got to understand about me, I'm from Lewiston, and I live and I experienced the world of Maine from the left of the turnpike. The comfortable aesthetic of the coast. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I could tell you in 2 seconds what it is. White House, black shutters, the coast, the cove. That's not this work. This is the kind of work you see when you're on a train going through a town. You see their backyards, their fences, their laundry on the left. This is kind of like wholly observational of that point of view. That's the part of the world I enjoy. That's the part of the world that celebrated me my whole life, that I still have chosen to be a participant in. The work ethic I came from was factories and shoe shops and mills. I still do construction work to this day. This morning I was on a job site. I can't help it. I just work that way. So that gives you some idea of the narrative of who I am. Okay, that's the perspective is not from this side of the coast. It's from the other side of the coast. The other point is I just turned 73. And I just realized that I'm still romantically in love with my profession, the same way I am with my wife. I love being an artist. We talked about layers of art. The art world's in many layers. I participate in the bottom ferment, the boiling part that's trying to constantly crack through that calcified museum culture, that calcified Sotheby's auction culture. I love taking a position of being the outsider and going through it. Now, I can do that with some idea that I can manage to do it. I have some credits, something I can use. I have my ability to speak, my talent. So I want you to know that. So some of these things might be challenging. They're challenging for you. They're for me, too. I love abstraction because it does break the tyranny of visual perception. I don't know what I'm looking at. So I paint through my mind. I paint through my psychology. I would rather be involved with an emotionally intelligent person than I would an intelligent person. You understand what I mean? I've learned to appreciate that kind of ability to live with. I would trust somebody's instincts more than I do an intelligent person who's giving me by calculated rote an opinion. So you have the romantic side I'm trying to talk about, which is very important to sustain your life as an artist. And then I'm very curious besides. I am so glad to have lived long enough to have access to neon light, marquee signs, all the new inventions that are available in art. And I'm so grateful for my personality of not, keeping myself committed just to paint. So I feel so great being lit up behind by this wonderful piece. And that's called L.A. Roll. It was about Lewiston, and it has segments of I don't know, reminds me of the beer halls my dad used to drink in, man caves, art, cool kind of thing. So this is kind of, so we'll go back into the dialogue, but that gave you some idea where I'm at. Don't take me seriously. I don't take myself seriously, please. Don't take me wrong. I'm serious like cancer about what I do, but I really love to be playful with my life and my work. And what a luxury, right? What a luxury. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
That's awesome. And actually, I want to reiterate something that we both just said, but just to hear it, the way Charlie put it, trust yourself. He trusts the audience. I was doing a talk a few months ago in Portland, and somebody asked Henry Isaacs, how do you get the audience, how do you come to trust the audience? And it floored Henry. He couldn't even understand the question because to be able to do work like this, you have to trust the audience. And one of the critical things is you want to feel it. And that sort of like outreach, that the idea of like understanding the work is, feel your way through it. So use, your emotional intelligence when you're encountering work like this, as opposed to just sort of like, your intellectual, brain, school educated, conversational side, which is what I do for a living. But sort of my goal though is that like when people look at art, they'll look at it and they'll internalize it and they'll take it with them. I don't want people to have to sort of think about like the words consciously, verbatim, while they're looking at something. It's more like, so when I write a column and I publish 600 columns or in catalogs or whatever, the idea is read it, internalize it, and make that part of your sort of understanding of what's happening. And so I want to get to abstraction, because what's interesting is, Charlotte, there isn't that much overt imagery in these pieces, and this is one of the things I want to ask you about. But when you introduce imagery, it comes in very fluidly, but it doesn't have to be there. What about that? What do you think about sort of the abstraction versus?
I do. I'm a storyteller. You can hear me talk. I have a need to tell stories. Now, this is about not being able to get everything I want in life. I have to give up something to get here. And I have to give up the narrative. I have to give up the idea that there's gravity. I have to give up the idea there's a top and a bottom, a sky and an ocean, a middle ground. I have to give up the idea that houses stand up straight. I have to give up a lot of preconceptions to enjoy this space. But if I could tell you what they are, probably look like shards, broken pieces reassembled, pieces of beautiful crockery, pottery, artifacts. They remind me of my sculpture. They're physical. They feel like steel plates bolted together. They feel I actually feel that way when I'm making them. Because what I'll do before I make a painting, the paintings that I will run off on large sheets of plexiglass. I'm a printmaker, and taglio prints on colored sheets of paper. I'll build stacks of them in colors. So I have this, it'll take me weeks to build up this body of work. And then I'll separate them like pastels would have. I would separate, and then I'll approach it that way. So the abstraction, does that answer that? I did get off on this thing a little bit. Bring it back.
No, but
no, it's okay. That's all right.
Well, we can come back to that too.
Bring it back.
This is important. Okay, so like Charlie's talking about sort of like printmaking, the intaglio, how there's a sculptural quality. It is a really cool thing to look very closely at these things because you can see how they're made. You can see how they're built out, how they're layered. And one of the things about painting is that the narrative, the literal narrative of the making of the painting for painters is the opposite of what we see when we're unpacking it from the front. So like just imagine the idea that, you know, painters can start with blank canvas and then they build towards the viewer. And then, of course, when we're looking at something, we start with stuff on the surface and we kind of find our way into the depths, into the history of the picture that's being made. Charlie's abstract works, all of his works, actually show this really well. And even with his printmaking, you know, he's talking about these pieces of metal being bolted together, but even in his sculptures, you can see the process, you can see the layering, how they're built up.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy that. I like showing that, a warts and all kind of experience, so to speak.
Yeah, but at the same time, where you see it as sculptural, I actually see all of your work kind of as painterly. So,
everything comes from the painter's point of view. Yeah.
And I think that is critical for understanding like your work, your prints, your sculptures, your paintings. You could technically call them collage paintings because he works with this palette of prints that he's made.
Yeah.
But the idea of painting, then, now I'm going to do my nerd jump to Cubism for a moment, which also relates to Rose's show in the Interior Gallery. So with late Cubism, with early Cubism, I'm talking Picasso and Braque from 1911 to 1913. Very nerdy, sorry. But the first part of Cubism, which is really difficult to talk about, and if you get 20 art historians in a room, which I hope you never do, and you ask them the same question, which would be wrong on your part, you would get 20 completely different answers. It's very difficult, but in a nutshell, early Cubism was about finding that sort of liminal edge, that just bare minimum, what is required for something to look like something else. So we can recognize a painting as, just say, a head or a guitar or a still life. That bare edge, that liminal edge. And that's in analytic Cubism. And it's very difficult to understand, and it's visually challenging, and it can be tough because it's about it. And then suddenly it inverts. And Cubism that Picasso and Braque were doing exploded with what's called synthetic Cubism, where what they were basically doing was creating an encyclopedia of what was possible in painting. How do we make representations? And what are all of the possibilities? How do we use them? So they invented collage. This is the idea of textures, the idea of line, value, volume, of forms and outlines and shapes. But even textures like using like the fake wood comb to do the hair on somebody in a painting. It gets really funny and witty, but shadows and it's all every possible. And what happened at that point was that Picasso and Braque never went to abstraction, but all around the world that last year, Kupka in the Czechoslovakia and Malevich in Russia and Kandinsky, who was Russian working in Germany at the time, and Bala in Italy, and Dove in America, and Delaunay in Paris, and Mondrian, who's in Holland, all at the same moment started making abstract painting, because you can't say who did it first, really, because it was a moment and it comes out of this thinking. And the crazy thing is that the idea of paintings that what Cubism was getting at was legibility. Is the guitar, is the head, is the bottle, is it still life, what is it? And then these guys all realized, all of these people, that it just had to be legible as a painting. And so the painterly vocabulary alone is what helps us understand. We all know we're looking at paintings. My older son's first sentence, he said, he pointed at this giant abstract painting, and he said, "That's a painting." And it blew my mind. This is a true story. He's this little kid, points at a painting and says, "That's a painting." And I'm like, the thing is, 120 years ago, nobody could have recognized that as a painting. It wasn't possible. So abstraction has all these possibilities in it. This is what I'm getting at. And so there's a fluidity in Charlie's work where imagery can come in or it doesn't have to be there, but it's enough that we know that we're looking at a painting, this product of work, these layers, everything that's happening. There's a lot going on, whether it's being laid out consciously or not.
Yeah, we're talking today about 1917, my favorite year in American art, of art. I have Abraham Walkowitz. What an incredible abstraction. Jules Passin, Dove, Gorky, I mean, not Gorky, all this stuff, these things, these fermentations. And they were freeing themselves of the tyranny of the institution, the academia. They had to come alive. The world was insane. And it took 100 years to get where we're at. So we're insane again. But I don't want to go political on this, but I mean, we're talking about in the art world. There's things I want to do. I recall the story about Bonnard going into the museum. At the end of later in his life, he would come in with an overcoat with paint, and he'd be painting on his pictures, fixing them. They have to throw them out. I mean, for his paintings, he just I want to fix this. A spot here is driving me crazy. I mean, so that I couldn't possibly answer the question and give you any clear example, because I don't really have a memory of doing them in a certain way. I have a memory of experiencing them.
But isn't it too that you're thinking visually?
Yeah,
it's not like there's a verbal narrative to like how you're doing it. It's like you were talking about sort of like the ball. You look at it, you're going to catch it. But what that is, it's like fluency. So when people play music, at first, you're looking at notes like written down. You have to find where that might be on the guitar. But the idea is that you get good enough at your art to think where the thought itself is. And it's the same thing. You're thinking in these terms. Once you understand your materials, you know what you have at print. You know how to put it down. You know how to draw with the extruder. You know how you're applying paint. And you can literally think about sort of resolving that in those terms or what it is. So it's like visual thinking.
It's like asking Tom Brady how he knew that they were going to be, Edelman was going to be there. Exactly right. You're in tune. Things are on. And that's why you love making another one, because it feels good. There's no other place to be but there. And that's why, I've spent my whole life working hard so I can keep making. I haven't relied on the audience to enable me to make it. I mean, that's kind of important to say. I mean, I don't mean that I'm dismissing my audience. I care very much about it. But I have to be in charge of this situation. Yeah. And then critics come in and ruin the whole thing. But
we don't ruin it. What we do is we go into the field of battle when the fighting is over. We bait up the wounded.
No. I like Dan. He's a pain in the ass because he'll get himself in trouble. He'll say things, and I find that so refreshing because art has to come up against resistance to be good. It's kind of like this when the butterfly is in a chrysalis. When it's trying to get out, there's a place where it has to fight so hard to get away, it almost breaks its wings. But if you help that butterfly out of that, if you cut it for it, it can't fly. It needs that final struggle to be able to fly. If it doesn't, so children, I'm raising my children. I'm a helicopter dad. I'm an old dad, so I'm the worst at that. So I got to remember to not do that kind of thing. But as a critic-artist relationship, I love the fact that we don't have to get along, but his mind is slow enough to listen. My
mind is slow enough.
Well, no. Well, yeah, what I mean is...
That's on tape.
Okay, no, I don't want to get this gentleman to say, when I go into look at work at art, I'm looking at it too fast and too emotionally. Dan can come in and read a room quickly. That's your gift. You can read the picture and take in. I come in, I don't like, I do all that kind of stuff too fast. And if I've made any mistakes in my life, it's my prejudices have gotten ahead of me in a couple ways. But I still hate pop art. I don't care what they say. So. Yeah, but I hope tonight, after we're successful enough to leave some latency from the conversation, you won't remember the words, but you'll remember the emotional content of the conversation, hopefully. And the same thing with my work.
I'll remember some of the words. Mine is so slow.
We'll work this out on the way back to Portland. No, well, I was thinking about critics.
I should get it by the time.
That's an interesting way to look, because I'm so, I don't know, OCD, hyper, like I'm an athlete looking for the ball, look for the ball. That's how I'm. And when I go look at art, I still respond to art that way. My prejudices come into play. I don't look well. I'm not, that's why I'm not an art critic. That's why I'm an opinionated artist. Studio artist, that's a whole different kind of artist.
You don't look well, but you look good.
I look great. I look like I know what I'm talking about. For me to be able to write about what I just saw, It'd be impossible. It would not be a clear narrative. It wouldn't be appropriate. So I try to figure out, and we're mixing our color on the canvas as we're talking here. So when Dan walks in, he picks up on things that I go, where the hell do you get that from? You know, because I feel like you will slow down for the work to look at it. You could do a quick read. So I'm not flattering you with that. I don't think you need that, but I'm just trying to explain the different ways we relate to a thing. Now, when I collect art too, I love buying art. I have a nice collection. I have to slow down to buy it. That's a thing. When I'm going to put some money down, I take my time. Because sometimes, some of the things I buy are like a bad girlfriend. They just don't work real well. Well, they let you down with a big way. It's like you feel heartbroken because I thought you loved me. And that's because I wasn't listening or looking.
I actually think that art critics look at work a lot more like the public. There's a difference between the people and I'm sure that there are plenty of people who make art in this room. I know some people are actually very talented in this room. Some people. So, but other people are not, they don't come from that way. But I actually, going back to the cubism thing for a moment, the really important thing about how we encounter a painting, first of all, we have to know that it's a painting. We have to figure that out. So you're immediately thinking more along the lines of like a doctor or a detective, because then you want to figure out what's going on. What am I looking at? Is this a representation? Is it abstract? Is it a painting? Is it a collage? Is it a print? You wind up asking yourself all these things and all these little data points, all these like hints and traces and symptoms or whatever way you want to put it, clues. And then we go on a path, and often there are some things that tell us like this thing wants us to think it's beautiful, or this thing, this guy wants us to think in terms of process or design or accuracy, objectivity, skill. There are all kinds of different things that you see. But I think that's in general, we first try to figure out what are we looking at. And then one of the critical things that happens, which is very difficult for most people to talk about, particularly artists, is what is the relationship between what we're looking at and how much does the artist want us to sort of get on the same page as that artist. And too often artists will confuse motivation and inspiration with content. A lot of artists think that they own, like the idea, like I want to say this painting is about sort of like going to visit grandma, therefore if you don't see that it's about going to visit grandma, you don't understand it. And that's extremely problematic. But the other thing, I mentioned before about the sort of fluency, thinking in terms of like the material that you're working with. When you're around a very accomplished artist, particularly an artist like Charlie, who's working in a visual mode, and he's fluent. It's like learning another language, you can translate something into, whatever, Japanese, Chinese, French, or whatever. But after a while, you learn a language you don't have to translate, and you literally think and produce in that other language, and that's fluency. And that's what he's doing here. And so when you encounter somebody who's doing sort of visual work and is extremely fluent, it's easy to feel like you're on the same page with what this person is up to. And when you can get there and you're confident about it, it makes it much more enjoyable, particularly when you don't have to struggle with like, oh, this is about sort of, I don't know, could be about Trump, or it could be about identity politics, or it could be about sort of like the difference between Eastern and Western dialectics and philosophy, or this is Heidegger or whatever. You're not going there, and it's it's about sort of like the personal visual experience, and you can see the work in the visual ideas that are going into it. You can feel it, and it's that leaving it at that level where Charlie's making work. I think he wants, and this is, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but you want your sort of experience of what you wind up with to be as close as possible to what the viewer's going to have.
Yes, I would feel terrible if I would be holding back anything, because I don't think that's a pleasant experience for me as a participant. Yes.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I see a lot of sensuous human forms in your work. Do you feel that?
Partial figures.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. That comes into play, reclining figures. I see landscape I see voyeurism. Paintings are voyeuristic to me. Windows. You're looking into windows, into spaces.
Do you feel that when you're painting?
I don't get any of that when I'm painting.
You don't?
No, I get it after I'm painting.
After.
You ask Muhammad Ali how the fight went. He doesn't know. He just fought the fight. I mean, it's really, you're just in the game. I mean, that's an interesting metaphor, boxing, wrestling. It's a wrestling with my angels, if that's a better example.
So when you were mentioning the flow of your line, you don't feel when you're putting that down any kind of
Sensuality to the line? Absolutely. The way de Kooning, these whole things are all trying not to be de Kooning. I mean, just like any white male painter is stuck with this problem. It just is. It's a pain in the ass, but I mean, generational. It just is, and that's why there's so many great women artists that don't have to deal with that bullshit. I mean, we've all been indoctrinated, especially my generation, with that line. And also, I've been trained. I can draw. I can draw anything. I have a skill set. I was going to be an illustrator. I have that. So my whole process is, how do I kill my pinky from going up? That's it. As soon as they give me a crow quill pen, it's like this. And I'm doing that. I mean, I got to stop it, get it down. So what I do is I draw with Sharpies. I'm better not having all the skill. I switch mediums because I'm such a control freak. I'll get so good at it, it'll become repetitive. Now, if I make this, I don't know anything about this. Now, this is a brand new game now, buddy. Now you're up against something. I got to throw money at it, research, figure it out. Was it art? I love that one. Is it art? Yeah, it better be, because I'm in trouble. I'm 50 grand into these things, and I better make them work, That's a other thing, commitment. I commit big time. I paint 20, 30, 40 paintings this summer. I will paint 100 this year. I've got 20 paintings out in Maine right now. I've got sculptures going up. I got commissions. I mean, that's the drive. I feel great in that place. And I spent 20, 30 years in the wilderness with nobody calling me. My phone was a rock. There was nothing happening. And I didn't like it. So I had to go make something happen. And I'd like to engage big personalities like this guy, poke them a bit, just get it all moving, right? It's wonderful. Poke the bear. And so I was sitting with a woman watching the Republican National Convention. If Ronald Reagan got the nomination, he was going to end the Vietnam War. If Richard Nixon got the nomination, the war was going to continue. Richard Nixon got the nomination. I got angry. I walked out, kicked the trash can. The lid went off the trash can and rolled down the street. Holy shit. Cop car came by. I bumped into the cop car. Those days it was not nice to roll around with cops if you had long hair and a mustache. And they stopped, and they started roughing us up. So I beat the cops up and went home. And everybody in town with a mustache got arrested that night while I was sleeping. And it's a true story. This is funny. But they happened to be mall cops. They were working for the racetrack, so it wasn't so bad. I got off the hook. The next morning, I got a hangover. I'm really in big trouble with everybody. And this giant figure looms in the studio door. He was huge, Philip. He opens the door. Great. He says, "Kid, you got to get out of town. Here's Mercedes Matter's number at the New York Studio School. Call her and get your ass out of Saratoga Springs. You got to go to New York." That was the kind of man he was. I mean, that was great. And I loved him. I'll tell you, the first time I heard a lecture by Philip Guston, you want to hear this stuff? This is good. This is a great story. So I'm from West Virginia. I'm a hillbilly. I don't know much about the art. Matter of fact, I didn't even know there was a modern art world. I thought it was like Saturday Evening Post. That's what I was going to end up doing. But so I go to the first lecture I ever heard by Philip Guston. His slideshow is my 100 favorite paintings. He's got to teach to make a living. He's not selling any work at that time. And he shows these slides and then Pierrot and stuff like that. And he shows a slide of a bowl of cherries. It's in the Boston Museum. He said, the reason I love this painting, I thought he was going to talk about the ellipse and the space and the way it fits. They're just so delicious. And if you ever contemplated that life wasn't worth living, or too sad to live, or it wasn't good enough, just think of the joy of a bowl of cherries. I said, that's why I like art. I like that kind of relationship to art. That's beautiful, isn't it? I said, I like him. I like that way of talking. and because everything was pretty highbrow in those days. When I went, he had passed away, and he helped me out throughout his life. He was a very generous man. And then he has a show at the Corcoran Museum after he died, and I went up the stairs, marble stairs, and I crawled, and I see his last paintings. They're the size of this wall, and they're giant cherries. He was dying, and he paints these giant cherries, big stems on them, and windows. And in other words, when there was blood on that sword, somebody was dead or dying. He meant it.
Yeah.
And that really taught me something serious about art. If he's lived it.
Well, he was a badass too. So right when you were starting with him, he showed at the Marlborough Gallery, which is like the top tier gallery. And he was making abstract paintings and doing all right with it. And then he switched over to do these sort of cartoonish characters, these KKK guys, and he did like, like Nixon later and all that stuff. And they were
smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, they couldn't handle it, and so they kicked him out.
Yeah. Well, I was there that night. So this is a good anecdotal story. I was painting Gottliebs. I needed work, so I used to paint Gottliebs, big egg and bacon, I call it. I paint 3 or 4 a day, Gottlieb. And so I went to the show, that evening show. So I went over to, I was talking with Gottlieb, Adolf Gottlieb, I don't know if you know his work. And Alex Katz comes over, and they're talking, and I'm kind of like, since I'm a kid, I'm invisible. And so Katz says, what do you think of these paintings? And Gottlieb says, I think it's disgusting. He shows his emotion that way. I went, Jesus, what a bunch of jerks. Well, the next day, Guston's kicked out of the gallery. Alex Katz is in, and he goes to the David McKee gallery. David gets kicked out with him because he's supposed to control his artists, right? Because all these clients bought these fuzzy Gustons, and now they got these crazy Ku Klux Klan people smoking cigarettes and driving cars through the Bronx. So then he goes and he has this big show at the Barbizon Hotel, which is a woman's hotel way up on the wrong part of town on the 2nd floor. I mean, so that's just what the art world needed. It just needed a refresher. It needed a recharge. The kids came like crazy. They loved it. Everybody from downtown loved them. And I've got a letter from him telling me, that's how I'm going to be somebody, Charlie. I need the kids. I don't need these institutions. I don't need the silos. I don't need their approval. Hilton Kramer called him, and he says, the Mandarin pretends to be a stumble bum. What a comment. But now we look at him as such a magic artist who gave us so much freedom and ability to draw and think and live. I wish he would have lived long enough to know it. The last time I saw him, he was drinking scotch and milk. Had an ulcer, he's tired, he wasn't happy. And I wish he would have known how great he was.
Well, that's one of the problems, though, with art. We want it to push the boundaries. Like I've mentioned Cubism several times. The thing about Cubism, it was ahead of what we could put in words. Yeah. And it invented what became known as semiotics, or whatever.
Yeah.
But, which is really complicated, but it's just ahead. And
Cubism made Picasso and Braque famous, rich. Guston suffered his push through that.
Well, that was kind of a lucky thing, too, that involved
that's
Russia.
True. And Jackson Pollock, I mean, that was a big move on his part. I mean, that was a big risk, man. You do that drip and it doesn't work, buddy, you're out of the game. It's over. And how many of us want to do that with our lives? Make that gesture that takes it out, but it's so refreshing when it happens. Now, I'm not doing that, unfortunately. I wish I was a little stronger, but I thought my neons were a little more courageous. My paintings I'm dragging my history through with me, and I care about all these people. If I put that together, I don't think I've approached a point where anybody's fleeing the room.
Well, I put him to sleep for you.
Oh, there you go. You didn't suffer.
A few more comments that I want to make, but now this is a good time for questions. If we're going to switch, anybody have any questions for Charlie?
Can you talk about the collaboration process on your neon pieces and your sculpture?
Yep. I love that. Man, the reason I love being in Maine is I have the ability to collaborate with so many terrific artisans who really care about what they're doing. When I was in New York working with a welder, it was a sculptor who'd rather be welding his own pieces. So I got some kind of ambivalent participation. Here, the guy I work with, Bob Minardi's a He's a blacksmith. He loves making my pieces with me. And actually, he makes them better than me. That's the strange thing about sculpture. After a while, he's got my method down. I love printmaking. I found collaboration through printmaking when I got invited to the Vinyl Haven Press years ago when Pat Nick had that. I love the idea of having printers, master printers, helping me facilitate my work. And they are here in Maine. I wanted to make neon, so I looked up. I got online. I found 3 neon guys. I have Neon Jake, Neon Pat, and Neon Dave. Neon Dave is an artist who makes his own neons, so he's a little ambivalent, but he needs a job. Neon Jake, he's really good, but he's a big Trump supporter, and he kept poking me and driving me crazy, but I was working with him. And Neon Pat works in a sign shop who has enabled me to grow my art in this amazing ways. Because of Neon Pat, I just did a 25 by 8 foot sign that I put on a roof in a building. I wouldn't have known. I went to see a Neon Pat about neon, so I'm walking around this sign shop in Lewiston. I'm going, holy shit, I didn't know people could do that. They got neon bulb marquee signs. And I mean, I wish I'd have known this when I was drinking. I could have made a little sketch, sent it off, and it'll come back on a truck in a couple weeks. It's pretty cool. So I'm like enjoying another level of collaboration that is with these new fabricators. And this idea you can plug in art is pretty cool.
Yeah, but it doesn't always work. So like that 24-inch piece behind you, that was supposed to be 24 feet, right?
Yeah, that's right.
We were just talking about Spinal Tap.
Yeah, Spinal Tap.
Anyway,
and not everything works. No, we're just talking about the winners, okay? Okay, well, that's how it is, right? It's like real estate. You don't talk about the losers, you just talk about the winners and act like you're a big shot. Everybody's there. So in between all of this is all the fodder that made all this possible. It's all the failures. It's kind of like these pieces, if you're looking like crockery, it's kind of like Potter's Field. You know, Potter's Field comes from the Bible when Christ, when they're talking about God will discard us like charge of a potter into the fields. And they'll lay. So I love that poetry of it. So we talk about the winners, and some of these might not even win later. I don't know. I'm working on them. Some of these I'm still participating in. Did that help at all? Collaboration, I love in Maine. Painting is singular. I can't have anybody in there with me. That is so not okay. Not okay. I love making small prints because they're wonderful ambassadors to my work. I mean, I love the proliferation of the print. Anybody who's a painter, I'll tell you, I went to an exhibition, and I will get better. A friend of mine ran a gallery called, she carried prints of artists between the wars, between World War I and II. And that would be Minnesota and it could, Marin and some names we know. But I went to a show one time, and it was Norman Barr. You know Norman Barr? He's kind of obscure, but a good painter. And I said, how come I don't know this artist's work, considering myself somebody who'd been around? She said, because he never made very many prints. I go, what does that mean? She says, well, artists who make prints have a world in the print world that goes on while they're out of favor. That goes, people buy and sell, they trade it, they pass it on. They're not overly priced. People can love them as well as you kept your piece that long. It flatters me.
But they are priced.
They're priced.
There's a market.
And
So this print is worth $400 or $600, whatever, as opposed to like somebody who makes 12 paintings a year.
Yeah, and then
the market doesn't.
Yeah, and you get killed because I can sell thousands of prints to people and they enjoy them, and I can only sell hundreds of paintings. What would I rather be? I'd certainly rather sell thousands of prints and get to know people and have them respond to me. And so I'm going back into a body of work right now. I'm not trying to oversize it, but I will have to oversize it because the nature of our art world needs that kind of power too. I'll have to show some tour de force work. Oh, thank you so much. I really had a nice night.